With few characters in the Marvel realm being as skilled as Spider-Man when it comes to science and technology, there have been times over his 60-year run where Spidey has been left with a conundrum that even he can't find a proper answer for. And that's what we're here to talk about today. As I'm Jules, this is WhatCulture.com, and these are 8 mysteries even Spider-Man couldn't solve. Number 8. The truth about his parents' life theft. Now, the 90s was a slightly bonkers time for comics, with ludicrous stories, some garish character redesigns, and a general feeling of needing to think completely outside the box. And one prime example of this is 1994's Life Theft. Looking at ways to bring something different to the Spider-Man table, Marvel Comics opted to have Peter Parker's long-dead parents, Richard and Mary, return from the grave. Previously said to have died in a plane accident years ago, the Parkers turned up at Aunt May's door in 1992. For almost 2 years, Richard and Mary would connect with their son, explaining how they'd actually been kept as prisoners by Russia during the time that they were presumed dead. It only took a matter of weeks for Peter to let his ma and pa know that their boy was indeed Spider-Man, which resulted in Richard doing his best to instill a harder, tougher edge to his son's superhero antics. Unfortunately, Spidey was so caught up in all of this that he failed to see the truth about his so-called parents. Once the Life Theft arc rolled around in 1994, it was explained how the real Richard and Mary were indeed dead. Instead, these returned versions of the Parkers were actually life model decoys created as part of a scheme involving the Chameleon, Vulture, and the Harry Osborn iteration of the Green Goblin. Number 7. How to Stop the Juggernaut. Nothing Can Stop the Juggernaut. 1982's 2-issue Nothing Can Stop the Juggernaut story absolutely lived up to its title. Here, Black Tom Cassidy hatches a scheme to have the Juggernaut kidnap Madame Web in order to take advantage of the Web's psychic abilities. Due to said psychic abilities, the long-standing mentor of Spider-Man is aware this Juggernaut attack is coming, and so is able to summon the Wallcrawler to her side. Tasked with putting a stop to the ever-ongoing rampage of Kane Marco, Spidey has to work out how to finally end the chaos-causing ways of this powerhouse. In his quest to topple one of the strongest, most relentless villains in Marvel Comics, Webhead first throws his usual punches, kicks, and web attacks at his rival. When that doesn't exactly work, he launches a steel girder at the big lad. Once that proves unsuccessful, Spider-Man goes to great efforts to drive a tanker truck full of gasoline into him, and even then, the Juggernaut simply laughs all of it off, largely due to the fact that the ruby he possesses basically gives him his own personal force field. When Spider-Man finally does get the better of old Juggy here, it's only a temporary one. Taking the battle to a conveniently placed construction site, Peter works it so that Marco ends up trapped in some wet cement, with everyone around him aware that it's actually only a matter of time before the Juggernaut breaks free, meaning that Spider-Man never really solved the problem of how to actually stop the Juggernaut. Number 6. Harry Osborn's Demons. Best of Enemies. Very much a case of like father, like son, Spider-Man has found himself tormented by both the Norman Osborn and Harry Osborn versions of the Green Goblin over the decades. And while Norman is forever simply one man who is just the outright evilest of characters in the realms of Marvel Comics, Harry was and is slightly different from his old man. In the case of Harry, his days as the Green Goblin were usually driven by addiction issues and battles with mental illness. And throughout the history of Spider-Man, one of the greatest conundrums he's ever had to deal with was how to save Harry Osborn from his struggles and personal demons. Unfortunately, old Webhead was unable to stop Harry from succumbing to his dark instincts, so much so that in 1993's Best of Enemies arc, we saw Peter's longtime best friend fully embracing the Green Goblin persona and embarking on a mission to kill Spider-Man. And to do that, that meant kidnapping Mary Jane Watson in order to get Spidey's attention. This whole plot from the Goblin would eventually lead to his own death. Having injected himself with a souped-up version of the infamous Goblin formula in order to take down the Wallcrawler, Harry would end up being fatally poisoned by the serum. Realizing the error of his ways on his deathbed, Harry would then pass away with Spider-Man at his bedside. Number 5. What really killed Gwen? The night Gwen Stacy died. The specifics behind the death of Gwen Stacy was a mystery that Spider-Man couldn't give a definitive answer on for decades. Of course, 1973's does exactly what it says on the tin. The night Gwen Stacy died is one of the most famous stories in Spider-Man lore. Now, this tale played out across just 2 issues and concluded with the tragic demise of Gwen. And for years, it was never known exactly what action caused the death of Peter Parker's first love. Kidnapped by the Green Goblin and thrown off of a bridge, depending on which books you're reading, said bridge varies between the George Washington Bridge and the Brooklyn Bridge, Spidey manages to fire off some webbing to catch his falling love. By the time the wall crawler gets to Gwen's body, she's dead, with the question being whether it was the shock of the fall that killed her or whether Spider-Man's webbing had caused Stacy to fatally break her neck. Even after then Marvel editor Roy Thomas stated Gwen's death was caused by the whiplash impact of Peter's web, that was conflicted in the comics by Green Goblin proclaiming it was the shock to her heart caused from the fall that was behind Gwen's demise. Since then, there has been no set answer to this tragic question, with stories like 1994's Marvel miniseries claiming the fall caused Gwen's death, but then tales like Civil War stating it was indeed a broken neck that did Gwen in. Number 4. How to Get His Body Back. Dying Wish. One of the most well-known comic book runs of the modern era, 2012 saw Dr. Octopus become Spider-Man and embark on his own 44-issue run with the Superior Spider-Man title. From writer Dan Slott, Dying Wish is an arc that completely shook the Spider-Man character to its core. With Otto Octavius terminally ill and getting increasingly closer to taking his final breaths, the crazy bastard manages to concoct one last evil genius plan, and that plan is to swap consciousness with Spider-Man, and wouldn't you know it, he actually managed to pull this plan off masterfully. As a result, the mind of Dr. Octopus was now in the body of Peter, and the mind of Peter is trapped in the dying body of Octavius. While Otto is a true genius, so too is Peter Parker though, so Peter manages to place a small piece of his consciousness in the mind of Spider-Ock, which is pretty confusing, but at least it made for some interesting inner dialogue. Anyway, with his new webtastic body, Octavius sets about proving that he is a better hero than Parker could ever be. Thus, he intends to show himself as a superior Spider-Man to his long-standing rival. Throughout all 44 issues of the Superior Spider-Man title, Peter was unable to get his own body back, as Ock cracked skulls and saved the day. Regardless of how much he wanted, not even the smarts of Peter Parker could work out a way to take control of his body. In fact, the only way that Peter managed to get full control of his body once more was when Otto voluntarily gave Peter said body back as part of the Goblin Nation storyline. Number 3. Saving Aunt May and his marriage. One more day. Just seeing the words "one more day" will likely send a shiver down the spine of any big-time Spider-Man fan. This 2007 story is one of the most hated in the history of old Webhead, and with extremely good reason. Taking place on the back of a civil war that saw Spider-Man reveal his secret identity to the entire world, One More Day sees Aunt May shot and fighting for her life after Peter Parker's nearest and dearest find themselves in the crosshairs of some of Spidey's fiercest villains. With May dying, the nefarious Mephisto arrives on the scene to make Peter an offer. Being an all-magical demonic presence that he is, Mephisto agrees to save May and make the world forget that Peter Parker and Spider-Man are one and the same. But the catch is that the rogue will erase the marriage of Peter and Mary Jane. Having the ultimate problem to solve, Webhead is left to deliberate over how he can save Aunt May whilst also similarly keeping his marriage to MJ intact. Unable to find an answer to this, and with support from Mary Jane, Peter is forced to make a deal with the literal devil. In reality, all of this was done because Marvel realized that they'd actually messed things up by outing Peter as Spider-Man during Civil War, so to wipe this event out of existence, the call was made to put together what would become One More Day. Number 2. The identity of the Hobgoblin. Even now, it's not 100% set in stone who was the Hobgoblin at any particular time in history. As such, this mystery was one that Spider-Man never fully had under control, and a large part of that was down to the creative process at Marvel Comics. With Marvel deciding that they wanted Spider-Man to fight the Green Goblin once more, but not wanting to resurrect Norman Osborn or have Harry Osborn back under the mask, the Hobgoblin was created and debuted in early 1983. Similar to the Green Goblin, but vastly stronger and more calm and sensible, the writing team intended to draw out the mystery of this new rogue's real identity for as long as possible. Even once the character debuted, there was no set idea of who the Hobgoblin actually was. Roger Stern eventually decided it would be the corrupt fashion designer Roderick Kingsley under the HG guise, but that plan was then changed to Richard Fisk once Stern was replaced by Tom DeFalco. DeFalco later stated to new editor James Owsley how Ned Leeds might be the Hobgoblin, which then saw Owsley insist the character actually be sea-level rogue the Foreigner. By the time the now dead Hobgoblin was finally unmasked in 1987, it was indeed Ned under the mask. It would then be explained how Leeds had actually been brainwashed into becoming the Hobgoblin, and the real hobby was actually Jason Macendale, aka the former Jack-o'-lantern. Even after that, Flash Thompson was positioned as the Hobgoblin, Phil Ulrich became the Hobgoblin, and Roderick Kingsley's twin brother Daniel was another to take on the role. So Spider-Man never had a damn clue who the real Hobgoblin was, and that was largely down to how Marvel itself couldn't actually decide who the real Hobgoblin was. And number 1, the KRAVEN conundrum. Fearful Symmetry. Fearful Symmetry, KRAVEN's Last Hunt, is one of the all-time great comic book arcs, period. This 1987 tale is a true work of art when it comes to its story beats and, well, its actual art. By this point, readers had spent 25 years seeing Spider-Man usually come out on top against any foe that he faced, but this 6-issue 87 offering saw the Wallcrawler bested in a way never seen before. With his abilities having been always based around his tracking and hunting skills, KRAVEN decides that he wants to score his biggest prize to date, that of Spider-Man. KRAVEN and Spidey had faced off plenty of times over the years, but this time KRAVEN wanted to put an exclamation mark on this rivalry. Doing exactly as he intended, KRAVEN simply sought out Spider-Man, beat him to a pulp, fatally shot him, and then buried the body. Not content with this, the Hunter then dons his very own version of the black spider suit, cracks the skulls of some criminals, and even captures the feral vermin who Spidey had previously been struggling with. In basic terms, Spider-Man just could not cope with KRAVEN during this particular meeting. As for the old death of Peter Parker, well, that didn't actually happen, for it would be revealed that Sergei had actually shot his rival with a tranquilizer shot rather than a bullet, meaning that Spidey eventually woke up and climbed out of his grave. So comprehensively had KRAVEN beaten Spider-Man here that the villain actually opted to take his own life, knowing that he'd finally achieved his ultimate goal. And there we go, my friends. Those were 8 mysteries even Spider-Man couldn't solve. I hope that you enjoyed that, and please let me know what you thought about it down in the comment section below. As always, I've been Jules, and you can go follow me over on Instagram at RetroJ, but the O is a 0, and it'd be great to see you over there. But before I go, I just want to say one thing. Here's a mystery that we can all solve, and that is the mystery of just being kind to ourselves. I know that it can be difficult sometimes, but trust me, you deserve all of the love, respect, and happiness in this world, and I just want you to go out there and live a healthy and happy life. So please be kind to yourself and others around you, because at the end of the day, that's the only way we're all going to get through this, and that is together. Big love to you and your neighbor. As always, I've been Jules. You have been awesome. Never forget that,